Welcome and good morning. I am Victoria McDonald, today's worship associate, assisting our ministerial candidate, Reverend Kevin Carson. Reverend Kevin is coming to you online from Rhode Island. Hopefully you've had a chance to check out his website and read some of his past sermons. If you are a friend of the church and would like a chance to virtually meet Reverend Kevin, please contact Molly Brinkerhoff, and if enough people are interested, she will set up a friend's Zoom chat with Reverend Kevin the week of May 4th. Our weekly announcements are, this is from me personally, if you have time, please stop by the church. We have a tree just about to bloom. We have a field of dandelions. It's beautiful. Maybe pick up trash, whatever you see, just so we maintain this church from its exterior, because we have cleaned the interior. So anyway, that's just an appeal from me. And please, women, feel free to help. It's not just up to the men. Before we get started, I need to mention that how this church stays afloat. Later in the service, we will have an offertory time. There are several ways you can send your donations. First, you can send your pledge or donation by mail to P.O. Box 50376, zip code 82405. Second, you can go to our church website and click on the Give button in the upper right-hand corner between Search and Contact. When you click on this button, you can give via PayPal or your credit card. Be sure to note whether this is a plate donation or part of your pledge. Even if our building is closed, we still have expenses to pay. And after the service, all are welcome to join our virtual coffee hour after the service by clicking the link in the email. Today we'll have very few joys and concerns because this program is being totally pre-recorded. So welcome. Welcome to this morning, this day, and this opportunity to be together in a community online service. We now move into the sacred time of worship. As I ring the peace bowl 3 times, take deep breaths in, let them out slowly, and relax completely. For this moment in time, let go of your anxieties, fears, and worries. Be in this moment. And we'll begin our service with a prelude, which is issued by White Sands and titled Memory. Since we are not together, I will read our church covenant. You can recite it from home with me. Love is the spirit of this community, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. We'll now light our chalice. If you have a candle or a chalice, please light yours with me. The chalice lighting was found on the UU website. With humility and courage born of our history, we're called as Unitarian Universalists to build the beloved community where all souls are welcome as blessings and the human family lives whole and reconciled. With this vision in our hearts and minds, we light our chalice.
Good morning. Our call to worship is the poem Fear by Khalil Gibran. It is said that before entering the sea, a river trembles with fear. She looks back at the path she has traveled, from the peaks of the mountains, the long winding road crossing forests and villages. And in front of her, she sees an ocean so vast that to enter there seems nothing more than to disappear forever. But there is no other way. The river cannot go back. Nobody can go back. To go back is impossible in existence. The river needs to take the risk of entering the ocean, because only then will fear disappear, because that's where the river will know. It's not about disappearing into the ocean, but of becoming the ocean. I invite you to join in singing our opening hymn, number 113, Where is Our Holy Church?
Good morning. Let's go to hymn 113 together. I will play it from the top to the bottom, and then we'll sing together.
Our reading is from A House for Hope, The Promise of Progressive Religion for the 21st Century by John A. Burens and Rebecca Ann Parker. Within the theological house of progressive faith, there is room for tremendous variety, diversity, and dissent. But there is also a defining focus, a devotion to the flourishing of life. People of progressive faith care for the sacredness of this world, this life here and now. We do not look to a world to come that is more valuable than this world. We cherish our bodies, this earth, this time and place that is within our grasp. We reverence the intimate, intricate, and unshakable reality that all life is connected. We honor and respect the bonds that tie each to all, that weave us into an inescapable net of mutuality. We vow to care for the interdependent web of existence. We desire all life to thrive, and therefore we resist those social evils and systemic injustices that benefit a few at the expense of many, or that allow a privileged existence for some, while others have their hearts and bodies broken by exploitation, prejudice, censure, or lack of access to the rights and resources needed for life. We critique any conception of God that functions to bless an unjust status quo or to alleviate human responsibility. We affirm a covenant among all beings that we honor with our hearts, souls, mind, and strength. We will do everything in our power to assure that this covenant of life, for life, is honored. And we seek to connect our circle into ever-widening ripples of influence for good. Last fall, when I decided to enter the ministerial search process, I imagined how it would progress, starting with a round of interviews by phone or video, followed by visits to churches for pre-candidating weekends. And if a match was successful, then a candidating week, getting to know a congregation and the local area. But then, well, you know the rest of the story. COVID-19 happened. Fortunately for me, thanks to the folks on your search team and the rest of you wonderful people, and thanks to the availability of online technology, my virtual candidating week from afar has felt very close to the normal process I imagined. This has been a most enjoyable week, and I feel I have already visited Idaho Falls, though I have yet to actually set foot in Idaho. In the grand scheme of things, the disruption of my regular life and even the unique challenges of seeking a new ministry in the middle of this pandemic have been little more than an inconvenience. And for that, I am extremely grateful. I can work from home and still get paid. Everyone in my closest circle of family and friends has remained healthy, as have my coworkers, and so far as I know, so have the congregants in the churches I have served for the last few years. Even among my social network on Facebook, I have heard of only a few deaths among the friends and relatives of others, and these were people I did not know personally. I hope this remains the case, but it is all but certain that it will not. I know many others in America and throughout the world have not been as fortunate as I have been. In our country alone, the virus has already claimed the lives of over 64,000 people, and that number will continue to increase for the foreseeable future. Each loss brings unimaginable grief and suffering to the loved ones left behind. And even for those of us who have not lost anyone, it is easy to become racked with fear and anxiety and to empathize with the suffering we witness. A frightening new reality has spread across the globe, forcing us into social isolation, disrupting our schools and places of worship, and shutting down commerce, leaving many of our neighbors struggling just to afford food and other necessities. These are trying times, unlike anything we have seen in recent memory. It would be nice to say that life will soon return to the healthy, happy times we enjoyed before the pandemic. But we have little reason to believe this will be over anytime soon. And even when it is, the world before COVID-19 was anything but healthy and happy. This pandemic did not break a system that was just, life-affirming, and sustainable. Far from it. I believe one of the lasting impacts of the pandemic will be exposing just how broken the system was before. It has exposed the harsh reality of issues like economic inequality and insecurity, access to health care, the fragility of our food supply, and who the real essential workers are, and the disproportionate hardships felt by people of color in this country. The mutuality of our human family and our interdependence with the web of life is self-evident, and looming large over everything is the reality of climate change. And though there are lots of examples of heroic people stepping up to the challenge, including some of our elected leaders, this crisis has further revealed the gross incompetence, greed, and lack of compassion that characterizes far too many of our local and national leaders. The inept and uncoordinated national response to this pandemic has been appalling, and some of the deaths already recorded could likely have been prevented with better leadership. I can only imagine what historians will say about this chapter in our history. It is an overused cliche to say that with crisis comes opportunity, but I believe we are experiencing such a moment right now on an unprecedented scale. This pandemic has thrown a giant metaphorical monkey wrench into an unjust global system that has thrived on inequality, oppression, bigotry, and environmental degradation. And while I'm sure that the few who enjoyed most of the privilege in the world before will fight very hard to restore the old system, aided in part by the vast numbers of people who remained blissfully unaware, there are truths now laid bare that will be nearly impossible for most Americans to ignore. For those of us who were already challenging the status quo before the pandemic, those of us who already felt a moral obligation to fight for a better and more just world, I believe we are about to enter into a new era. As the world comes slowly back to life, it is critical that the failures of the old systems continue to be called out and challenged even more vigorously. The heightened awareness of the intersectionality of so many human rights and environmental justice issues needs to be hammered home repeatedly to keep it from fading back into the shadows. If the economy turns around quickly, especially in the more affluent countries, it would be hard to prevent backsliding into the consumerism and societal apathy that ignored injustice before. But I suggest that we are re-engaging in the struggle in a world that has been rudely awakened in many ways. There is at least the potential to make more progress in the new world, and this is not unprecedented in human history. I recently read an article that compared the current crisis to the time around the Black Death that swept through Europe beginning in 1347. And there are a number of interesting parallels and some important differences. The disease, which is now believed to have been bubonic plague, had a much higher mortality rate than COVID-19, wiping out between a third and half the population of Europe. It reversed the course of a population that had tripled in the 3 centuries beginning around the year 1000 during a tremendous economic boom. It was not an equitable time of prosperity, though, because with the feudal system still firmly in place, most of the good land remained in the hands of the privileged class, and the growing population of common folks were forced to subsist by farming on increasingly poor land. When Europe entered a cold period of climate change known as the Little Ice Age in the 14th century, crops began to fail, and a series of famines swept through Europe between 1311 and 1317, killing an estimated 10% of the population just a generation before the Black Death. Multiple wars between city-states and various kingdoms also took a toll on the population, especially the 100 Years' War that lasted from 1337 to 1453. When the plague came along, cities like Florence, Rome, and Paris were decimated. Feudal economies, already stretched thin by the ongoing conflicts, began to collapse, causing a banking crisis among the nascent superbanks of northern Italy. People panicked and looked to the church for answers that nobody could provide, weakening the institution's moral authority over Christendom. In some places, Christians whipped themselves to suffer as Christ suffered in hopes of appeasing an angry God. In other places, Jews became the scapegoat, as they too often have, and many were killed by angry mobs. But despite all of this death and chaos, two great changes emerged for the good. One was a transition from feudalism to a new economic order that benefited the peasant class because of a surplus of land and a shortage of labor. It was the first step on the road to more individual rights and the Industrial Revolution. The second big change was, of course, the Renaissance, which brought a flourishing of science, art, music, and religious innovation. I doubt we will see something like the Renaissance emerge from the ashes of the pre-COVID-19 world order, but perhaps we can at least see some progress on the justice issues I have mentioned. Some people are suggesting that this is a warm-up for the bigger challenges we are beginning to face with climate change. So maybe something really big and revolutionary will surprise us, and our species will finally do something meaningful about it. As Unitarian Universalists, we can look to the story of our faith for plenty of inspiration for the times we face. So often our spiritual ancestors were among the vanguard of reformers associated with major social movements from public education to abolition to women's suffrage, civil rights, reproductive rights, and marriage equality. We should be proud of our history, but it is important that we also acknowledge the times we have fallen short of our ideals, particularly on issues of race and white supremacy. We still struggle at times to remain true to our hopes and aspirations for the world, but I believe we try very hard, and we do not shy away from going against the prevailing social opinion. Our faith calls us to foment a holy unrest in the world, not to be satisfied with an unjust status quo, but to do something about it. We march, we write letters, we advocate in the centers of power, and we even get arrested once in a while if it draws attention to our cause. Most importantly, we show up when we are needed and when our allies reach out to us. We are humble enough to know we don't have all the answers to the world's problems, and we have learned to listen to the experiences of others who come from very different backgrounds. As we begin to write the next chapter in the story of our faith, so many of the struggles will be far too familiar. Racism, for example, is a persistent stain on our nation that has seemed to grow worse in recent years, at least in its public face, largely thanks to certain politicians and organizations that have used race to sow discord and division among Americans. The fact that saying Black Lives Matter is seen as controversial should be alarming to any decent person. And this is a problem that plagues communities throughout the nation. Black Lives Matter banners are regularly vandalized in the bluest of blue states like Massachusetts, just like everywhere else. Meanwhile, there are many places where voting rights for blacks and other minorities are under attack through legislation, political dirty tricks, and local policies that seem straight out of the 1950s. Then, of course, there are the almost endless challenges to reproductive rights and the basic human rights of LGBTQ folks by politicians trying to curry favor with ultra-conservative voters in several states. Even though justice usually prevails in the end, having to keep fighting the good fight year after year can be exhausting. I can't imagine engaging in such work without the support of a faith community. I've often said that the big social justice movements in American history were driven by a spiritual engine. And I also believe that finding a strong theological grounding for such work can be a crucial source of both empowerment and comfort for us, no matter what spiritual path we may follow. Big social justice initiatives may need the support of denominational leadership and alliances with other organizations to be effective. But fundamentally, it takes the work of congregations and individuals at the local level to make it happen. We can't take on every issue without spreading ourselves too thin and burning out. But even a small congregation usually has a remarkable number of people involved with a variety of issues that we can support. And as a community, we can identify a few key issues that deserve the focus of our talents and energy to really make an impact locally and globally. Big issues like climate change are important, but it's often the smaller local issues that affect the lives of our neighbors more directly in the short term. And sometimes these are issues where we can more easily make a difference. In our video conferences over the last week, we have often discussed the political differences between Idaho and Rhode Island, where I currently live, and how some issues are more relevant to one location or the other. If you vote to call me as your next settled minister, learning about the unique challenges you face in Idaho, and in Idaho Falls in particular, is one of those opportunities I eagerly await. Justice work, though, is only part of what we do as a faith community. There is so much more that a spiritual home like the UU Church in Idaho Falls has to offer in good times as well as the bad. And it is during the most challenging times we can really rise to the occasion. Times that emphasize that the church is not just a place where we gather in community, but a community that extends beyond any walls or boundaries. The current crisis is especially tough for us because so much of what we do is done together, and we still crave the joy of physical gatherings. We strive to be a place that welcomes anyone who is a spiritual seeker, or feels alone in society, or simply needs to lay their burdens down. It is so hard for churches right now, but we are doing the best we can with the help of technology, streaming services, and providing opportunities for making connections. Human beings are social creatures who find comfort and meaning in community, and we are being forced into an unnatural isolation. We are simply not meant to live alone. In our times of need, it is the compassion we feel from others and the compassion that we can extend to others that reveals our deepest humanity. My heart aches for family members who cannot be at the bedside of their sick and dying loved ones, and for clergy of all faiths who cannot visit the patients to provide whatever solace they might. I don't know what rules are in place for Idaho hospitals, but here in Rhode Island, clergy visits are not allowed except for end-of-life rites, and that is only after explicit doctor's permission. Providing pastoral care at a distance has become the practice, and everyone is struggling with what to do about funerals and memorial services, because these are usually the times when we most need the comfort of family and friends. One thing I'm sure will be included in the next chapter of our faith story is the lessons we have learned during the pandemic about finding new ways to provide so many of the services our churches have to offer. So what comes next? What might the future hold for Unitarian Universalism and for the UU Church in Idaho Falls in the post-COVID-19 world? I don't pretend to have psychic powers to see the future, but I do think there are clues we can recognize and a vision that we can embrace. This tumultuous and uncertain period has shown that our holy church exists in the hearts and souls of each one of us, and in the love we feel for each other. We like to say we are the church of the open minds, loving hearts, and helping hands, and this is on display now more than ever. And if there were any lingering doubts about the reality of our mutuality and interdependence, I think all but the most willfully ignorant of our species are starting to understand. On the justice front, this translates into a renewed emphasis on working together on issues that are connected, finding the intersectionality on issues that bring diverse organizations and individuals together to make a difference. I have seen this in action, and perhaps some of you have as well. I remember a few years ago in 2014, I was contacted as an alumnus of Andover Newton Theological School at the request of the Moral Mondays movement in North Carolina. This movement, founded by the Reverend William Barber, started when the North Carolina chapter of the NAACP and a few other groups began to hold regular public witness events at the State House in Raleigh in protest of a number of issues such as poverty and voter suppression, calling out the elected leaders for failing the people with immoral policies. Over time, more and more progressive organizations and faith groups joined the cause, and other issues were recognized as being intertwined and important to the overall benefit of the community. Environmental justice, women's reproductive health, and access to health care in general, and so on. Every Monday, they would bear witness, and a few would typically defy the rule to stay out of the legislative chamber, intentionally getting arrested in an act of civil disobedience. This has continued for years, and once a year, a large march and rally is held to raise even more awareness. Responding to the nationwide call for clergy to support the march, I went to North Carolina in 2014 and had the privilege of lending my support. It was one of those eye-opening moments in my life that showed me what the future of activism, and particularly faith-based activism, could be. What I witnessed that day was an amazing collaboration of secular organizations, concerned citizens, and clergy of all faiths coming together and sharing their messages, telling their stories. Doctors and nurses marched in their work uniforms, demanding changes in the healthcare system. Local chapters of the NAACP sang familiar spirituals in beautiful harmony. I will never forget one older rabbi who carried the Torah scrolls on his shoulder throughout the march, speaking truth to power without saying a word, seeming to project some holy power like an ancient Hebrew prophet. Changing the world for the better in fundamental ways is no small feat. It will take a movement of movements that appeals to the heads and hearts of our neighbors to be effective. But the good news is that we are already seeing such a movement of movements emerge. I have seen it firsthand. I believe we Unitarian Universalists have a lot to contribute to the blessed unrest that is emerging in the world and trying to make it a better place. And this will be a major theme in the next chapter of our faith. We are a faith that offers a tremendous vision of hope for a world that needs all the hope it can get. Hope is not a strategy, as the saying goes, but it is hope that sustains the work we do, even when the obstacles seem overwhelming. As people begin to crawl out of isolation, I suspect there will be a strong desire for community to simply be around other people again. Maybe we will even see a surge in church growth as people reassess what life is all about and seek meaning in a world that has come unraveled around us. For now, let us do whatever we can to bring more hope into the world. Let us pray that we will all remain safe and comfort each other through these difficult times. Let us hold in our hearts the many sick and grieving people around the world, that they too may find comfort and healing. May it be so.
Our offering words are by Kayla Parker. We know that our financial contributions to this congregation come from sacrifice and hard work. We are so grateful for this and commit together to ensure the funds we gather collectively do a greater good for ourselves and for our world than they could have done alone. May this be an offering to sustain and grow the life and mission of this congregation. May we give in to love and hope. While we listen to Acoustic Breeze by Bensound, remember you can donate via the Give button on our church website, upper right-hand corner, or send in a donation directly to our post office box, 50376, zip 83405. We gratefully receive any offering that you have given. This is a special time in our congregation where each of us has an opportunity to share major events in our lives, our joys, our concerns, and our sorrows, since we can all be uplifted by our UU community. I have one joy for myself and one concern. My joy is for the flowers, thanking my mother for planting the bulbs that I've never seen. I've never been here at this time of the year since I was a young woman, and they are absolutely beautiful, and I appreciate her work, and she has been gardening with me, it feels like. My concern is that Honey and I are leaving to go back to Alaska. We will put the car on the barge in Seattle, and we will fly out SeaTac and arrive in Ketchikan about an hour and a half later. So keep me in your thoughts, and we will be back in the fall, and I will miss you. I light one candle for all of us as we struggle with today's challenges, individually and collectively. And I light an additional candle for all those joys, concerns, and sorrows we hold in our hearts and are unable to share today. Stay healthy and strong, members and friends. Our UU community lifts up its love for each and every one of you.
Now for hymn 318, We Would Be One. Please listen while I play it one time through, and then join me on verse 1.
Several years ago, I ran across an interview given by the philosopher and activist Cornel West, who described hope better than anyone else I have ever read. He said, "Optimism and hope are different. Optimism tends to be based on the notion that there's enough evidence to say, looks pretty good out there, things gonna be better. Much more rational, deeply secular. whereas hope looks at the evidence and says, it don't look good at all. But we're going to take a leap of faith, go beyond the evidence to create new possibilities based on visions that become contagious, to allow people to engage in heroic action, always against the odds, no guarantee whatsoever. That's hope. I'm a prisoner of hope. I'm going to die a prisoner of hope. Never going to believe that misery and despair are going to have the last word. Friends, it has been a pleasure to meet all of you this week. You have helped me feel even more hopeful about the world. So let us take the light of hope from this place into the world, doing justice, loving kindness, and walking humbly with the sacred mystery that sustains us. Go in peace, return in love.
I will now extinguish our chalice with the following words. Join me from home if you wish. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. The postlude is entitled The Beauty of Spring, and it's a video done by Giovanni Marotti.